Greetings, BattleTech fans! One of the moments some of you have been waiting for has arrived. We're going to talk about armor. Now, some of you may be asking, Caboose, what is armor? Well, while I really hope no one is asking that question, I'm going to tell you anyway. And if you are asking that question, you should be ashamed. So ashamed. Simply put, armor is a barrier between a thing and something that wants to damage/hurt that thing. This can be anything from a simple sheet of paper that can block alpha particles from low-level emitters, antibacterial gel, or in the context of this video, massive slabs of extremely hard metal alloys or composites. It takes hundreds of man-hours to make, and only a split second of firepower to destroy. You don't think about it when it's there, but man, do you miss it when it's gone. Quite plainly, armor goes back as far as warfare. Since the first club was swung, people looked for a way to mitigate the damage done by said club. This came largely in the form of toughened animal pelts, heavy layers of cloth, and as technology progressed, things like brass or bronze studs holding it all together. But defenses improved and ways to get around them did as well. Clubs were exchanged for swords and hammers, slingshots for arrows, arrows for rockets, and on it went until we got to where we are today. Your average combat vehicle can pump out megawatts of energy, thousands of kilos of missiles, and enough ballistic weaponry that it can be measured on seismic scales. To the uninitiated, unaware, or just plain uneducated, modern battle mechs and tanks are impenetrable, unstoppable, awesome weapons of war. But those of us who have seen a field refit take place know that their amazing operational lifespan on the battlefield under fire is thanks to leaps and bounds in material science and manufacturing techniques, careful study and testing, or in some cases outright mistakes that bore unexpected fruit. Also, don't forget plain dumb luck. For the sake of simplicity, moving forward unless otherwise stated, we'll be talking about armor as it pertains to battle mechs or combat vehicles. The majority of specialized armor is aimed, pun intended, at those two vehicle types. However, specialized armor is far from exclusively mech or tank development. Before I get going, I'm sure some of you noticed the changed YouTube banner that I had made. A friend of mine does commissions under Designs by Zen Art, and I'll have the Etsy page in the description. On the screen right now are the various rates depending on what your commission type or complexity is. What was really nice was working to get this YouTube banner made. They knew exactly how to proportion it so it would appear properly on all platforms, and it came at a quality resolution. I highly recommend reaching out about any art project you might have coming up. Now, this is going to take a bit to get through, so come with me as we dive right into the world of armor engineering, manufacturing, testing, and best of all, destroying. As I mentioned, armor got its start quite a long time ago. Basic armor could be crafted by just about anybody, using layers of treated animal hides or thick fabric. Obviously, the protection this offered was limited, so to ensure better protection, more exotic materials were used. Well, exotic for the time period anyway. First came brass, then bronze. These were heavy and hard to wear in plate or chain form, so you would see someone wearing leather armor augmented by small plates or studs. Then came iron, which at first glance was seen as a wonder material. However, for as much as you could make with it, it was relatively soft in its pure form. Enter one of the first common alloys of iron, steel. Made by blending iron with carbon, steel was stronger and harder, which meant it could be made much thinner and therefore lighter. Heat treating was discovered sometime later, further adding to its usefulness to the point where heat treating or radiation treated steel plates are still used for personal protection today. Another thing used, quite common in the early days of modern armor protection, were ceramic and ceramic composites. These had the advantage of being easier to work with and install due to their lighter weight. Oftentimes they were much harder than steel, adding significant protection at the same weight. However, harder materials are counterintuitively easier to shatter. It takes more force, but the force that would make a small hole through a metal alloy will destroy an entire composite plate. Thus, they began layering these two materials and making advanced composites. You would have a high-strength steel outer layer and a ceramic composite inner layer. The outer layer would break up or soften the projectiles and greatly reduce their velocity. If it was penetrated, the ceramic layer would catch it and dissipate its energy the rest of the way. This had the potential to crumble that layer, but it wasn't outwardly visible, and they didn't have a total gap in protection thanks to the steel. With tougher armor came more advanced weapons. Shaped charges, penetrator rounds, high explosive missiles and rockets, airburst artillery, you name it. Things were more or less at a standoff for many years, neither offense nor defense really gaining an edge on one another. This all changed in the late 25th century when the first battle mech was debuted. They needed something much tougher to handle the rigors of combat envisioned for this new design, something that would stop all conventional weapons currently used. This new armor plating, as well as being tough, needed to be relatively light, easy to replace, and give feedback when protective coverage was lost. Enter your standard armor plating. Your standard flavor armor for battle mechs is just that, a standard. This is the baseline by which all other armors are graded. It came about specifically because of the age of the battle mech. Before that, what is now referred to as primitive armor was used. It was heavier, not as hard, and didn't offer the sensor data that many pilots have come to know and love. It might sound like a trivial extra, but real-time feedback on armor coverage will lend a skilled and aware pilot an enormous edge in combat. In the old days of tanks, typically a special alloy of steel was used or advanced composite in conjunction with ceramics. A lot of these layering techniques are still used today, but the material science has eclipsed those old designs. The first layer is a radiation-treated steel-titanium alloy. The radiation treating causes the alloy to form more of a crystal structure which, while enhancing its strength exponentially, also makes it exceptionally brittle. This makes it susceptible to impacts, mostly large and heavy ones like experienced in melee combat or, quote, interacting with the terrain, so to speak. The second layer is a ceramic cubic boron nitride composite. Woven into this are artificial diamond fibers. If you've ever seen how cotton candy is spun, you're not far off. Just don't try to eat it. These fibers are gathered in a spool and embedded in this layer for additional structural strength. All this rests on a third layer, which is a honeycomb-shaped structure of another titanium alloy. This not only gives support to the armor, but serves as a mounting point and holds a layer of an extremely viscous polymer, which serves to seal it all against the environment. If it sounds complex to make, it is. Well, it was. Due to economies of scale, it's actually the cheapest armor you can get that is combat viable. And, due to the way it shatters off a mech when impacted, replacing plates of armor is straightforward. It's routinely done in the field, usually with some makeshift lifting equipment provided by another mech. Woven into the last layer of the armor is a complex network of sensors. Besides sensing damage and loss of coverage, this comprehensive sensor network can be used for quite a few different tasks just due to its vast surface area. It's been used to do some of the following. I say some of because not all these reports are confirmed. Detect changes in air pressure, forecast weather, sense vibrations near the mech, detect emissions of stars, deep space communication antenna, and my personal favorite, near-field communication. This armor reigned supreme for centuries, and once the original battle mechs that the Terran hegemony fielded were captured and reverse engineered, it was used by literally anyone that fielded a combat mech. An important note, however, industrial armor is very similar to military armor minus the complex sensor network. Heavy industrial armor is identical in every way, leading it to be restricted on most worlds. Around midway between the peak and the beginning of the Star League, some of the hegemony scientists, riding high on that sweet military contractor money, decided they wanted to see what happens if they embedded a higher amount of diamond fibers in the still liquefied titanium steel alloy and then formed it into plates. The results blew everyone's minds. You had armor with the exact same properties as the original at about 12% less weight. The trade-off here was increased bulk, much like endosteel. For most mechs, this was considered acceptable. This greatly boosted the survivability of light and medium mechs, which are generally the workhorses of most units. This technology was lost for a time, about 500 years, but reclaimed with a score of other lost tech. Now, the clans perfected it like they had most things. Theirs was 20% lighter and half the bulk of the Inner Sphere version. Later, the IS would go on to develop light and heavy variants of this armor. These offered less or more protection in bulk respectively. The light armor had a comparable bulk to the clan version with a 6% armor gain. This was useful for heavy and assault mechs, while the heavy version offered a 24% armor boost with a 50% again increase in size over the standard IS version. This was a boon to lights and mediums that had the room to spare but were generally more fragile and didn't have a lot of available tonnage to work with. Ferrofibrous armor is a necessity for almost any battle armor designs, as any other armor type is just too heavy for the suit to be effectively mobile and well covered. Also during the height of the Star League, we got a null signature system. This could completely shield the mech from infrared or radar-based detection, and even bend light around the unit to shield it from visual scans. However, most of the complex engineering was lost to time, thanks to the House Lord's slap fight known as the Succession Wars, and when bits and pieces of it were recovered and reproduced, it wasn't nearly as effective as the original. Reason being that it functioned best when paired with some kind of electronic warfare, also known as electronic countermeasures or ECM. Dubbed stealth armor, it didn't offer more direct protection and took up more space, but still was able to completely mask thermal and radar signatures. The major downside is that to mask IR, complex baffles have to be placed over all the areas that vent heat, and when engaged, they are shuttered to reduce the overall IR output. This translates into greatly reduced heat dissipation of the mech. If Intersphere mechs were a sauna before, now they are practically volcanoes. It also reduces the capabilities of the mech's sensor suite, making it harder for the pilot to remain situationally aware. Because of these two things, the mechs that equipped it were primarily in sniper or ranged roles using low-heat ballistic weapons. As a side note, this armor type was much more effective when scaled down to battle armor size. Suits with this armor and the more refined improved version were invisible to all but seismic sensors and the naked eye. In my structure video, I mentioned that it was hard to engineer a weapon that was super effective against armor, but was equally effective against internal structure. Compromises were made, and the trade-off wound up being slightly reduced damage against both, with consistency being the benefit. Some clever boys at the New Avalon Institute of Science and the Laren Alliance decided that this had to stop. Deciding to thumb their noses at the clan's superior laser range, damage, power to weight, well, you get the idea. These scientists got their hands on a batch of failed ferrofibrous armor that was tagged defective. The reason that it was so interesting to them is because when the factory workers said fuck it and tested it anyway, they were quite shocked when the lasers reflected off and into the wall behind them. After the fires were put out and the singed hair cut off, they presented it to the NAIS and named it glazed armor. Its reflective nature mitigates all laser damage by roughly half. The electrical and thermal conductivity is also increased, having a similar effect on PPCs and flamers. Now, the common phrase throughout this presentation is going to be trade-off. This armor is exceptionally weak against impacts, taking roughly double damage from ballistic missile and other explosive ordnance. It will also take twice as much damage from interacting with buildings and terrains, and also mech fists. The other side of this coin is reactive armor. Rather than a happy accident, this was a revisited concept used at tank scale in the 20th and 21st century. The concept is that if you have small explosive charges embedded in the armor itself, towards the outer surface anyway, that are impact sensitive, when a shaped charge or explosive shell hits it, these microcharges go off and deform the blast, essentially fighting fire with fire. This is, for lack of a better word, freaky to experience inside the armor, but the result is mitigating the damage again by roughly half. This is good against all direct impact weapons that depend on an explosive or penetrating core. Serious development started in 3063 in the Draconis Combine, with the development phase greatly shortened due to the history of this design. Unlike glazed armor, the clans took notice of this new/old technology, notably Ghost Bear. During the Combine Ghost... Fuck's sakes! Dude, the fuck? I swear every time I start recording you... Why are you whacking a Demolisher 2 with a sledgehammer?
Oh, hey boss. Just showing the new guys here how to test reactive armor. They said they didn't know how.
So, you told the apprentice techs they needed to retest the reactive armor, and when they said they didn't know how, you decided to show them? This is how you lost your armory privileges, remember?
Well, you had to give me back my privileges, because nobody else in the company knows how to work on anything.
Okay, look. I want you to think really carefully about this one. What happens if your test is successful?
I guess that would mean that somebody bought some surplus Capellan crap. And you wouldn't have to pay me all that back pay that you owe me. Hey, new guy, here's the sledgehammer. It's your turn.
There you have it, folks. The best technician we have. We're currently accepting applications. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, Ghost Bears. They managed to capture quite a bit of the reactive armor and reverse engineer it for their own use. This was commonplace in the Inner Sphere, but quite progressive for a clan to do. Reactive armor takes normal damage from energy or kinetic impacts like melee weapons. However, there's a chance that the charges can trigger a chain reaction when they go off. This can, quite spectacularly, strip all the armor plating off a section and leave it completely exposed. This is bad enough in normal conditions, but in hostile environments it's catastrophic. In space, the explosion as well as the sudden decompression has a tendency to incapacitate a mech. Underwater or in high-pressure hostile environments, it's even worse, causing implosions and rendering any equipment offline with a significant potential to destroy it all. It's on an equal scale to ferrofibrous in terms of its increased size without the general protection bonus that comes with it. There are quite a few pilots unsatisfied with the protection trade-offs that were offered by these specialized armor types, and while they leveled the playing field against the clans in some instances, they were largely found lacking outside of very specific scenarios. Starting back in 3045, research had started in the Federated Commonwealth on a new armor type that boasted double the protection of standard armor at double the weight. However, its physical size was greatly reduced, allowing mechs to effectively equip double the armor they otherwise could. Entering prototype trials in 3047, hardened armor showed great promise but stayed on the back burner until that fateful day when the clans made themselves known. Limited production started shortly after, but widespread adoption was never really reached. See, while this armor doesn't have any damage trade-offs and the protection per weight is roughly the same, it has a different bulk problem. The researchers had realized that if they made the armor in such a way that the different plates overlapped, the potential for lucky shots to breach it was reduced by almost a third, and armor-piercing ammo was rendered ineffective. But a direct result of this was limiting the mech's movement and reducing its top speed, as well as making it harder to balance and keep upright from raising the center of gravity. For assaults and heavy units with the option to choose this armor type, they found the trade-off acceptable. The top speed of any mech was reduced by roughly 10 kilometers an hour, so while your Atlas definitely isn't going to win any races now, it would shrug off what would otherwise be crippling damage, including an AC-20 hit straight to the cockpit. The Ghost Bears struck again, managing to reverse engineer it for themselves alone. But the nature of this armor was an extreme hindrance to them, as its overlapping design precluded its use on Omnimechs, which made up more than half their overall army, and around 75% of their frontline units. IS designs were largely customized, and that restriction was barely felt. Moving on, there's one more armor type that bears mentioning, and it was developed by everyone's favorite cult-like telecom spin-off. For once not Comstar, but Word of Blake. Comstar spearheaded the research, but never got far on it. Word of Blake stole the designs when they split off and developed it to near perfection in secret. They had come across a component of Star League null signature system called the Chameleon Light Polarization Shield. This was the component that allowed mechs to avoid visual detection. Added to this were hundreds of microcameras and projectors, taking dozens of samples of the environment a second and projecting it on the armor. This was named Mimetic Armor. The signal processing was so advanced that it could never be deployed on anything other than battle armor, and even their movement was restricted. At a walking pace, the armor would blend in perfectly with its surroundings, making it borderline impossible to see by any means. However, since battles rarely stay slow-moving, once the trooper was pressed to keep up with the rest of the unit, it became a detriment. It would lag several seconds behind where the suit actually was, which became the modern equivalent of trying to hide behind a bush by carrying it with you. This was deployed only on the Purifier battle armor, and nothing else. So, with the majority of the armor types explained in brief detail, let's take a look at their use cases. Now, standard armor is a great all-around choice. No great benefit, but no great drawback. It's readily available and affordable, with predictable, even calculable performance. As mentioned, units with more space than tonnage available benefit greatly from ferrofibers. Increased protection at the expense of available space is of enormous benefit to lighter units. Their battlefield endurance can be extended by a significant percentage over their base design. I'm looking at you, Locust and Spider. Or it can be reworked into something more powerful like the Venom, mounting over 3 times the firepower as a Spider on the same chassis with equal protection and maneuverability. It also makes some designs possible that had either been lost or only theorized like the Hollander or the original Hermes. If you're fighting a known threat that has a doctrine developed around energy weapons like the Ghost Bears, Wolves, or Nova Cats, reflective armor will hold a nasty surprise for them. Couple that with their great reluctance to engage in melee combat of any kind, and its chief drawback is much less of a concern. This is similar with reactive armor in clans, Smoke Jaguar or Jade Falcon, who love their autocannons and missiles. Sure, there's still the possibility of a chunk of your armor going up in a cloud of smoke and shrapnel, but overall you'll wind up coming out ahead. If you have a small amount of mostly static defenders like most forward garrisons, hardened armor is a great pick. Speed is less of a concern compared to weathering the insane amount of incoming fire and slow arrival of reinforcements. Most enemy commanders will think twice when they see something like a Warhammer shrug off multiple PC and heavy autocannon strikes with barely scuffed paint. One thing I failed to mention about this armor is that if your mech is to fall over, it can take double or more damage than if it had standard armor equipped. This is largely due to the increased thickness and hardness of the plates, as well as the manner in which they overlap. Maybe, though, you just need that boost in protection to get you through the opening salvo. Well, the boys over at Comstar thought of that and came up with Modular Armor. Functionally, this is the equivalent to duct taping additional armor plating over top what's there. It's cumbersome and the hardware needed to attach it detracts from the armor you can carry to the tune of about 40%, but it can be thrown on anything in short notice. If you really want to give your technician a headache and the average BattleTech designer an ulcer, patchwork armor is for you. Need a well-protected swinging arm, sturdy cockpit and reflective torso? Throw ferro on the arm, hardened on the head, and glazed armor on the chest. It's a bona fide pain in the ass to repair, but it allows you to blend armor and work around the drawbacks of some, like hardened armor impeding the legs, or reactive armor misfiring and leaving your engine exposed. This will void your warranty. What if what you really need is intel, and rather than resisting incoming fire, avoiding it entirely? Well, while expensive, stealth is the way to go. Popular primarily on Ravens and Capellan space, these mechs are damn scary because you just can't hit them without getting right in their face. Some of you might be wondering about tanks or aerospace assets. Well, tanks use most of the same armor systems that mechs do, even stealth. The armors aerospace units use are named differently, ferroaluminum and ferrocarbide for example, but they have the same overall properties as their terrestrial counterparts. Let me know if you'd like me to touch on those in another video. Battle armor really doesn't have much in the way of exotic armor blends, and protomechs, well, they're another animal entirely. Holy shit, that was wordy. Warp Angel pointed out when I got rolling on this topic that I was biting off a little more than I was aware. There are at least half a dozen battle armor protection types, and protomechs have their own specialized armor as well. Warships and dropships have a naval scale analog to ground-based units, as I mentioned, but it is vastly superior in terms of protection because, well, there's plenty of space out in space. Hopefully this gives you budding mech designers out there something to think about before you follow convention. Remember, while conventional designs are safe because they are easy to quantify in battle, making that one alteration can have a big impact on their effectiveness. At one point, I had hardened armor on my catapult, and well, she stomped a lot of heads that day. But that's a story for another time. Something I've been thinking about lately. Let me know if you'd like me to get into the pilot history of the Horseman. Thank you all so much for your attention, patience, ideas, and continued support. Farewell, and until next time, maybe I'll see you on the battlefield.